I see you're asking for a completely new story about a different scenario. Let me create that for you based on the outline requirements. I'm Samantha, 53 years old, and I thought I knew what humiliation felt like until that night at Le Chateau. My husband Derek's wine glass caught the candlelight as he flung its contents directly into my face. The red liquid dripped down my cheeks, staining my favorite white blouse, while his mother Barbara cackled from across the table. "Pay the bill or this ends here," he declared, napkin still perfectly folded beside his plate. I smiled through wine-soaked lashes and reached for my purse. If you're watching this from a place where you feel respected, hit like and subscribe now. Let me know where you're tuning in from as I share how I reclaimed my dignity and discovered my true worth. Derek and I had been married for 15 years, and for 15 years, I had been trying to win the approval of his mother, Barbara, a woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair, designer clothes, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was wealthy widowed and wielded her checkbook like a weapon, especially over her only son. We met when I was 38, a recently divorced art teacher at the private school where Derek worked as the athletic director. He was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in my passion for watercolor landscapes. Our courtship was a whirlwind of thoughtful dates and long conversations about our dreams. When he proposed after 8 months, I believed I'd found my second chance at happiness. Then I met Barbara. "So you're the art teacher," she had said at our first dinner together, emphasizing art teacher as if it were synonymous with street performer. Her eyes scanned my modest dress, her lips pursed in disapproval. Derek always had eclectic tastes. That night set the tone for our relationship. She would invite us to dinner at exclusive restaurants where she'd order in French and reminisce about her late husband's business empire. When the bill came, she would make a show of reaching for her purse, only to discover she'd forgotten her wallet. Derek would immediately offer to pay despite our tight budget on 2 educators' salaries. "My son is such a gentleman," she would beam, patting his hand while looking pointedly at me as if to say, "He certainly didn't learn that from you." I tried everything to win her over. I baked her birthday cakes from scratch, remembered her favorite flowers on Mother's Day, and listened patiently to her stories about Derek's childhood stories that consistently excluded any mention of his father's alcoholism or the boarding schools that kept Derek away from home most of his youth. As the years passed, Derek changed. The man who once brought me wildflowers from his morning jog now critiqued my appearance before we visited his mother. The husband who had proudly displayed my paintings in his office now suggested I pursue more practical hobbies. The partner who had shared household responsibilities now expected dinner on the table when he came home, regardless of my own teaching schedule. "Mom says a wife should make the home her priority," he would say when I objected, and I, desperate to make my second marriage work, desperate not to be twice divorced at my age, desperate to keep the love of a man I was slowly losing to his mother's influence, complied. By our 10th anniversary, we were living in a house Barbara had helped us buy her name prominently on the deed alongside Derek's, my contribution to the down payment minimized as pin money. By our 12th, Derek had left teaching to work for his mother's foundation, a move that doubled his salary but quadrupled his mother's control over our lives. My teaching salary became "You're spending money, dear," as Derek took over our finances. My friends, mostly fellow teachers and local artists, were deemed not quite our circle by Barbara, and our social life shifted to country club events and charity galas where I was introduced as Derek's wife rather than by my name. Through it all, I kept thinking things would improve if I just tried harder, if I just proved to Barbara that I was good enough for her son. I started dressing differently, speaking less at social gatherings, deferring to Derek's opinions on everything from politics to what color to paint our living room. "You've really come along nicely," Barbara told me on our 14th anniversary, patting my hand as if I were a trained pet. "Derek was right to stick with you." That comment should have been my wake-up call. Instead, I thanked her, grateful for the crumb of approval unaware that my dignity was being eroded with every concession, every forced smile, every swallowed retort. 2 weeks before the incident at Le Chateau, Barbara called to announce she was taking us to dinner to celebrate Derek's promotion at the foundation. She had selected the restaurant the most exclusive in the city and the time 8 o'clock on a Tuesday, despite knowing I had parent-teacher conferences until 7:30. "I'm sure you can rearrange things," she said dismissively. "This is important for Derek's career." I rescheduled my conferences and apologized to the parents and rushed home to change into an outfit Derek would approve of for the occasion. I had just finished applying my makeup when Derek informed me that Barbara would be picking us up. "She's bringing Wallace Kingston," he added, not meeting my eyes. Wallace Kingston was a widower in his 60s who sat on the foundation's board. He was also, as Barbara had mentioned several times, very interested in meeting a mature woman with artistic sensibilities. "Is this a setup?" I asked, watching Derek adjust his tie in the mirror. "Mom thinks you two would hit it off," he replied casually. "He collects art." "Derek, I'm your wife." He sighed, turning to face me with an expression of exaggerated patience. "It's just networking, Sam. Mom goes out of her way to include you, and you're always so sensitive." I swallowed my hurt, and anger finished my makeup and plastered on a smile for when Barbara's chauffeur-driven car arrived. During the drive to the restaurant, Barbara and Wallace sat across from us, discussing foundation matters, while Derek nodded attentively. I stared out the window, feeling increasingly invisible. Le Chateau was everything Barbara favored, ornate, expensive, and designed to intimidate those not born to wealth. The maitre d' fawned over her, escorting us to the best table in the house. Wallace held out my chair, his hand lingering too long on my shoulder as I sat down. "Barbara tells me you paint little pictures," he said, his voice condescending. "Watercolor landscapes," I corrected gently. "I also teach art at Westlake Academy." "How quaint," Barbara interjected. "But Wallace here owns real art, Picassos and Monets. He has an eye for value." The evening continued in this vein, Barbara highlighting Wallace's wealth and status while diminishing my career and passions, Derek silently allowing it, and Wallace's knee occasionally pressing against mine under the table. When the waiter came to take our orders, Barbara selected the most expensive items on the menu, for everyone disregarding my quiet mention that I didn't care for foie gras. She ordered 2 bottles of Chateau Margaux at $800 each, winked at Wallace and said, "The young people can treat their elders tonight, can't they, Derek?" Derek nodded, smiling tightly. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Our joint account had been stretched thin lately with house repairs, and I knew my next paycheck was already allocated for our property taxes. Throughout dinner, Wallace dominated the conversation with stories of his business conquests and art acquisitions, each tale punctuated by Barbara's appreciative laughter. When he mentioned needing a cultural companion for his upcoming trip to Paris, Barbara beamed at me. "Samantha would love Paris, wouldn't you, dear? And with school out for summer soon." "I'm planning to teach summer art camp," I said, forcing a smile. "The extra income is helpful. Always so practical." Barbara sighed, turning to Wallace. "But surely those little finger paintings can wait. Paris is Paris after all." "I couldn't possibly leave Derek," I said, reaching for my husband's hand under the table. He kept his hands firmly on his lap. "Oh, Derek understands the opportunity here," Barbara continued. "Don't you son Wallace's connections could be transformative for Samantha's little hobby." Derek nodded, avoiding my eyes. "Mom knows best about these things, Sam." As the dinner plates were cleared and dessert menus presented, I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment alone to collect myself. In the elegant powder room, I stared at my reflection, a woman I barely recognized anymore, dressed in clothes chosen to please others, wearing a smile that felt like a grimace. "Who are you?" I whispered to the mirror. When I returned to the table, they were laughing about something, but fell silent as I approached. Wallace's eyes tracked me in a way that made my skin crawl. "We were just discussing logistics," Barbara said smoothly. "Wallace leaves for Paris in 3 weeks. That should give you plenty of time to arrange things with your little school." "I'm not going to Paris with Wallace," I said firmly. I'm married to Derek. Barbara's smile tightened. Don't be provincial, Samantha. This is about connections culture. Derek understands the arrangement. Arrangement, I repeated, looking at my husband. What arrangement? Derek cleared his throat, straightening his silverware. Mom thinks it would be good for your art career. Wallace has connections to galleries in Europe. And I've been lonely since my wife passed. Wallace added, his hand creeping toward mine on the table. A man in my position needs appropriate companionship. I pulled my hand away. I am not available for companionship, appropriate or otherwise. I'm married. Barbara's laugh was brittle. Oh, Samantha, after 15 years, surely you and Derek have a modern understanding. Marriage is a partnership, and sometimes partners help each other advance by being flexible. The implications of her words crashed over me like ice water. This wasn't just a networking dinner. This was a negotiation with me as the commodity being traded. The waiter approached with the check, placing it discreetly next to Derek. Barbara immediately reached over and slid it toward me. I believe it's your turn, Samantha. After all, we're celebrating Derek's promotion, and Wallace has been so generous with his time and attention to you. I stared at the check, $2,347. I can't afford this, I said quietly. Don't be difficult, Derek muttered. Just put it on your credit card. My credit card is almost maxed out paying for the roof repair last month, I replied. Well, I certainly didn't bring my wallet to my own celebration dinner, Barbara said, her voice carrying just enough to make nearby diners turn their heads. And I was given to understand this was Barbara's treat, Wallace added, looking uncomfortable for the first time. All eyes turned to me, waiting. In that moment, something inside me snapped. 15 years of diminishment, of compromise, of swallowing my pride, all of it crystallized into perfect clarity. No, I said simply. Excuse me. Barbara's eyebrows shot up. I said no. I won't pay for this dinner. I won't go to Paris with Wallace, and I won't be traded like a painting to enhance your social connections. Derek's face flushed dark red, a vein throbbing at his temple, a warning sign I knew well from our increasingly frequent arguments. Samantha, he hissed, leaning across the table. You're embarrassing us. Pay the bill now. I can't. I repeated, my voice steadier than I felt. And I won't. Barbara's perfectly manicured nails tapped against the crystal water glass. This is precisely why I told you to marry Caroline Whitman's daughter, she said to Derek as if I weren't there. Breeding shows in moments of crisis. Wallace shifted uncomfortably, signaling for the waiter. Perhaps I should— No, Derek cut him off sharply. My wife created this situation. She'll resolve it. I looked at my husband, truly looked at him, and wondered when this stranger had replaced the man I married. When had his spine dissolved? His compassion evaporated, his love for me transformed into this cold disdain. Derek, I said quietly, we can't afford this dinner. You know that. The property taxes. Pay the bill. Each word fell like a stone between us. If your mother wants to celebrate your promotion, she can pay for the dinner she arranged, I replied, gathering my purse. I'm going home. As I stood, Derek's hand shot out, gripping my wrist with enough force to make me wince. You're not going anywhere until you fix this. Let go of me, I said, aware of the attention we were attracting from nearby tables. Not until you do what you're told for once in your life, he growled. Barbara gave a dramatic sigh. Really, Derek? Must we have a scene? Samantha, just pay the bill and we'll discuss your attitude at home. My attitude? I laughed incredulously. You've spent 15 years treating me like an accessory, and now you're trying to— pimp me out to your board member, and I'm the one with the attitude problem. Wallace stood abruptly. I think I'll wait in the car, he muttered, retreating from the table. Derek released my wrist to grab his wine glass. I thought he intended to drink to calm himself, but instead he threw the contents directly into my face. The red liquid splashed across my eyes, nose, and mouth, dripping down onto my white blouse and pearl necklace, a wedding anniversary gift I'd purchased for myself when Derek forgot. Gasps erupted from surrounding tables. A server rushed over with extra napkins. Through wine-stung eyes, I saw Barbara's lips curved in a satisfied smirk. "Pay the bill or this ends here," Derek declared, his voice cold and final. Something inside me, perhaps my dignity, perhaps my self-preservation, instinct, perhaps simply the woman I used to be, before I lost myself in this marriage, rose to the surface. I dabbed at my face with the offered napkin, took a deep breath and smiled. Then it ends here. I reached into my purse, pulled out my wallet, and carefully counted out $87, every cent I had on me, and placed it on the table. "That should cover my entree and a generous tip for the server who'll have to clean up the mess your son made," I told Barbara. "The rest is your responsibility. After all, you ordered the wine he just threw at me." Derek's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. "You can't just—" "I can and I am," I replied, turning to leave. "Don't wait up." As I walked away, Derek called after me, "If you leave now, don't bother coming home." I paused, looked back at the table where my husband sat beside his mother, both of them red-faced with anger, surrounded by the trappings of wealth and privilege they valued above basic human decency. "That's not my home," I said clearly. "It never was." Outside, Wallace was climbing into Barbara's car. He had the grace to look ashamed when he saw my stained blouse and tear-streaked face. "I didn't realize. I thought it was an arrangement you were part of," he mumbled. Barbara says a lot of things." I cut him off. None of them worth listening to. I walked past the line of valets and luxury cars, past the restaurant's gilded entrance, and into the warm spring night. My purse contained my phone keys and precisely $0 after leaving everything on the table. I had no car, little cash, and nowhere to go. But for the first time in years, I had something infinitely more valuable, my self-respect. I called an Uber, using the app on my phone, grateful I'd set up an account connected to my personal credit card, the one Derek didn't monitor. As I waited on the sidewalk, I watched Barbara's car pull away, Derek's profile visible in the back seat, his posture stiff with rage. 15 years of marriage ending in a splash of red wine and a public humiliation. It should have felt devastating. Instead, it felt like liberation. The Uber driver, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes, took one look at my wine-stained blouse and tear-streaked face and asked, "Bad date? Bad marriage?" I replied. She nodded knowingly. "Where to?" That simple question stumped me. Where did a 53-year-old woman with $87 to her name and a controlling husband go after walking out of her marriage, the Parkside Hotel? I finally said, remembering a modestly priced place near the school where I taught. "Just for tonight." "On me," the driver said, canceling the ride on her app. "I've been where you are. Pay it forward someday." Her kindness nearly broke me. After years of calculated cruelty disguised as refinement from Barbara, this stranger's simple humanity was overwhelming. She drove me to the hotel, waited while I checked in, and pressed her business card into my hand. "Marlene," she said, introducing herself. "Call me if you need a ride, anytime." The hotel room was basic but clean. I washed the wine from my hair and face, soaked my blouse in the bathroom sink, and sat on the edge of the bed in the complimentary bathrobe, staring at my reflection in the dresser mirror. Who was I now? Not Derek's wife, not Barbara's reluctant daughter-in-law, just Samantha, art teacher, watercolorist, survivor of 2 failed marriages, because I had to admit this one had failed long before tonight's wine-throwing incident. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts and calls from Derek, alternating between angry demands that I stop this nonsense and come home, and wounded accusations about how I had humiliated him in front of his mother. Not one message asked if I was safe, if I was okay, or acknowledged that he had thrown wine in my face in a crowded restaurant. I turned off my phone and slept fitfully, waking before dawn with the strange clarity that often comes in life's darkest moments. I needed to secure my personal possessions before Derek could destroy or hold them hostage. I needed to protect my finances before Barbara could convince him to empty our accounts. And I needed allies, people who would support me through what would undoubtedly be a messy divorce. At 6 a.m., I called Julia Winters, my closest friend and the school counselor at Westlake Academy. We had drifted apart over the years, as Derek and Barbara deemed her too bohemian for their social circle, but we still exchanged birthday cards and had lunch occasionally when Derek was traveling. "Samantha," her voice was groggy with sleep, "is everything okay?" "No," I admitted. "Nothing is okay, but I'm going to fix that, and I need your help." By 7:30, Julia had picked me up from the hotel, taken me to her apartment to change into borrowed clothes, and helped me craft a plan. By 8, we were at my bank where I withdrew half the funds from the joint account. Derek and I shared my legal right as a joint account holder and opened a new account in my name only. "He's going to be furious," I said as we left the bank, a cashier's check for my half of our savings securely in my purse. "Let him," Julia replied. "You earned that money teaching for 15 years. It's yours as much as his." Next, we drove to my house. No Derek's house, I reminded myself, arriving just after 9, when I knew he would be at the foundation office. Using my key, we entered quickly, heading straight for the things that mattered most to me: my personal documents, my grandmother's jewelry, my art supplies and finished paintings, my journals and photographs from before my marriage. Julia kept watch while I packed methodically, focusing on irreplaceable items rather than clothes or electronics that could be repurchased. In my studio, I paused before a large watercolor landscape I'd completed last summer, a view of the lake where Derek and I had spent our honeymoon. I'd given it to him for our anniversary, and he'd hung it in my studio rather than in the main house where Barbara might see it. "Leave it," Julia advised, seeing my hesitation. "You'll paint better ones." We were loading the last box into Julia's car when Barbara's distinctive Mercedes pulled into the driveway. Derek emerged from the passenger side, his expression thunderous when he spotted me. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded, striding toward us. "Getting my things," I replied calmly. "Don't worry, I've left everything you and your mother picked out." Barbara joined him, her eyes narrowing at the boxes in Julia's trunk. "Theft is a criminal offense, Samantha. Those items belong to the household." "My personal possessions belong to me," I corrected her, "and I've withdrawn exactly half of our joint savings, not a penny more, though I was tempted after subsidizing your celebratory dinners for 15 years. Derek's face contorted with rage. "You had no right. I had every right." I cut him off. "Just as I have every right to walk away from a marriage where my husband throws wine in my face in public and tries to trade me to his mother's board member for business connections." "You're exaggerating," Barbara sniffed. "Wallace merely expressed admiration for your modest artistic talents. Derek was helping your career. By offering me as a companion to a wealthy widower, that's not help, that's trafficking." Derek took a menacing step forward, but Julia moved between us. "Don't," she warned him. "There are witnesses, and Samantha already has photos of the bruises on her wrists from last night." I hadn't realized the marks from his grip had bruised until this morning, but I was grateful now for the photographic evidence Julia had insisted I take. "This isn't over," Derek threatened, his voice low. "Yes, it is," I replied. "My lawyer will be in touch about divorce proceedings." "Lawyer?" he scoffed. "With what money?" I smiled thinly. "With the money I earned teaching art to children for 15 years, while you transitioned from educator to your mother's puppet." We left them standing in the driveway, Barbara already on her phone, likely calling the family attorney who had drafted our prenuptial agreement, an agreement that fortunately included a clause about physical abuse or public humiliation, constituting grounds for the agreement to be set aside. Derek had insisted on the clause to protect himself from me. He never imagined it would work in reverse. Julia drove me to her apartment, where she had already cleared space for my things in her spare room. "Stay as long as you need," she offered. We recovering divorcees have to stick together. For the first time since the wine had splashed across my face, I cried not from humiliation or fear or even anger, but from relief and gratitude for the friendship I had nearly lost to my toxic marriage. I don't know how to start over at 53, I admitted through tears. Julia handed me a tissue. The same way you start over at any age, one day at a time with people who actually care about you. That afternoon, I called the school principal to explain my situation. To my surprise, he was supportive, offering me extra summer classes to teach and connecting me with the school's legal counsel for a referral to a divorce attorney. Colleagues I barely knew offered spare rooms, professional contacts, and practical advice. Meanwhile, Derek launched his counterattack. He froze the joint credit cards, reported our car as stolen, though it was titled in both our names, and had Barbara's attorney send a threatening letter demanding I return all household items removed without permission. My new attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Evelyn Diaz, responded with the photos of my bruised wrist, witness statements from restaurant patrons about the wine-throwing incident, and a detailed accounting of my contributions to our marital assets. He's used to getting his way, I warned Evelyn, and Barbara has unlimited resources to fight this. Let them waste their money, she replied confidently. The law doesn't care how rich his mother is. The weeks that followed were a crash course in rebuilding a life from scratch. I opened a new bank account, applied for my own credit card, found a tiny apartment I could afford on my teacher's salary, and filed for divorce, citing cruel and inhuman treatment. Derek contested everything, dragging out the process as Barbara had taught him, if you can't win, exhaust your opponent into surrendering. But I had endured 15 years of subtle degradation and emotional manipulation. In comparison, honest conflict was refreshing. Each legal maneuver they attempted made me more determined to see this through. What Derek and Barbara hadn't counted on was how their own behavior would alienate former allies. When Derek told colleagues at the foundation that I was mentally unstable, several remembered seeing my bruised wrist at a function the day after the restaurant incident. When Barbara spread rumors in her social circle about my gold-digging ways, friends who had witnessed her 15 years of subtle cruelty toward me questioned her version of events. And when Derek claimed in court filings that I had abandoned the marriage without cause, the restaurant security footage subpoenaed by my attorney clearly showed him throwing wine in my face and grabbing my wrist hard enough to leave marks. 6 months after that fateful dinner, we sat across from each other in a mediation room, the wine stains long gone from my blouse, but the memories etched permanently in both our minds. You could have had everything, Derek said bitterly as our attorneys reviewed the proposed settlement. Mom would have provided for us for life. At what cost? I asked. My dignity, my independence, my self-respect. He shook his head, genuinely perplexed. What good is self-respect if you're living in a one-bedroom apartment and driving a 10-year-old car? Look at you now, starting over with nothing at your age. I studied the man I had once loved enough to marry, searching for any trace of the person who had once brought me wildflowers and admired my paintings. There was nothing left of him, if he had ever truly existed outside my wishful imagination. I'm not starting with nothing, I corrected him gently. I'm starting with myself. That's everything. The divorce became final on a crisp autumn day, almost exactly 9 months after Derek threw wine in my face at Le Chateau. The terms were better than I had expected. I received a cash settlement representing my portion of the home equity, full ownership of my retirement account, and a small monthly alimony payment for 3 years to help me transition to financial independence. Barbara had eventually pressured Derek to settle rather than risk more damaging evidence emerging in a trial. The final straw had been when Wallace Kingston, apparently burdened by conscience, provided a sworn statement about Barbara's attempt to arrange companionship for him with me in exchange for business connections. I used part of my settlement to rent a small studio space in an artist collective downtown. After years of relegating my painting to a hobby, I committed to treating it as the parallel career it deserved to be. My watercolors of local landscapes began selling at small galleries, then at regional art fairs, and finally at a respected downtown gallery where a positive review in the city paper described my work as honest, unflinching, and quietly powerful. The school where I taught offered me the department chair position when the previous chair retired. The job came with a modest raise and the opportunity to reshape the arts curriculum, a vote of confidence that brought tears to my eyes when the principal made the announcement. Julia remained a steadfast friend, introducing me to her circle of divorced and widowed women who gathered monthly for what they jokingly called survival celebrations. Through them, I built a network of supportive relationships based on mutual respect rather than social obligation or financial advantage. 1 year after the divorce, I received an unexpected letter from Wallace Kingston. He was selling his collection of European art and donating the proceeds to a foundation supporting victims of domestic violence. Your dignity that night changed my perspective, he wrote. I'm sorry I was part of what was clearly an ongoing pattern of abuse. I didn't respond, but I did attend the charity auction where his collection was sold, bidding successfully on a small sketch by a female artist I had long admired. It cost most of a month's salary, but owning it felt like reclaiming something of myself, the self that appreciated beauty and valued art, not as a status symbol, but as an expression of human experience. Derek remarried 14 months after our divorce to Caroline Whitman's daughter, just as Barbara had always wanted. I saw the wedding announcement in the society pages noting the bride was 20 years his junior and described as from a distinguished family with deep roots in the community, Barbara's code for old money and proper breeding. I felt nothing but a distant sadness for the young woman who would now live in the beautiful prison I had escaped with Barbara as her warden and Derek as her fellow inmate. As for me, I dated occasionally mostly men I met through the arts community or colleagues from educational conferences. Some relationships lasted a few months, others just a few dates, but all shared one quality: respect for my independence and work. I no longer molded myself to fit someone else's expectations or swallowed my opinions to keep the peace. On the second anniversary of what I now called my wine baptism, I invited my closest friends to dinner at a small family-owned Italian restaurant, the antithesis of Le Chateau's pretentious atmosphere. Julia was there, along with colleagues from school fellow artists, and Marlene, the Uber driver, who had shown me kindness on the worst night of my life and had since become a dear friend. To liberation, I toasted, raising my glass of sparkling water, and to all of you who helped me find my way back to myself. Later that evening, as we were leaving the restaurant, I noticed a familiar silver Mercedes parked across the street. Barbara sat in the driver's seat watching our happy group emerge onto the sidewalk. Our eyes met briefly through the car window. I nodded once, acknowledging her presence without animosity, and continued walking with my friends. She had come perhaps to see if I had been destroyed by the divorce, if I was suffering without Derek, if I regretted walking away from the life she had curated. What she saw instead was a woman surrounded by genuine friendship, unburdened by pretense, laughing freely without fear of criticism. I never saw Barbara again after that night, though I heard through mutual acquaintances that she had moved to Arizona for her health, taking Derek and his new wife with her. The foundation continued its work without them, and life in our city went on. As for me, I continued teaching painting and building a life that reflected my values rather than someone else's expectations. At 55, I bought a small cottage near the lake with a sunroom perfect for a studio. At 56, I had my first solo exhibition at a prestigious gallery in Chicago. At 57, I was featured in a national art magazine as an emerging watercolorist whose late career renaissance proves that authentic artistic voice can develop at any age. Sometimes new acquaintances ask about the title of my most recognized painting, a striking image of a woman's face, partially obscured by a splash of red titled The Wine Baptism. I simply tell them that art, like life, often emerges from our most painful moments, transformed by time and perspective into something unexpectedly beautiful. The wine that stained my blouse that night at Le Chateau was meant to humiliate me into submission. Instead, it marked the beginning of my liberation from a controlling husband, a toxic mother-in-law, and most importantly, from the fear of standing alone. There is a power that comes from walking away from something that diminishes you, even when staying seems safer or more practical. There is strength in choosing yourself when others have discarded your worth. And there is profound joy in building a life that honors your authentic self, whatever age that transformation begins. Would you have the courage to walk away from a relationship that diminished you? Have you ever experienced a moment that completely changed your life's direction? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if my journey from humiliation to self-reclamation resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear that. It's never too late to reclaim your dignity. Thank you for listening. And remember, your worth is not determined by those who fail to see it, but by your courage to honor it yourself.